As Rose said, I'm going to be sharing insights from the book An Epidemic of Uncertainty, which was published last year in September. And I'm going to be pulling from a few different chapters in order to give you like a taste of what's in there, both in terms of the substantive argument, some methodological insights, and takeaways about what life is like in rural Malawi for young adults. I really hope that you get a sense of what it's like to participate in intensive data collection and engagement with a single community over a period of 10 years. And I'm going to talk about some of the challenges involved with that, some of the things that are not always as neat as they seem in the published papers. Is everything okay? Okay. All right. And also the substantive insights about HIV and fertility, what it means to make decisions throughout young adulthood with a large and sexually transmitted epidemic looming around you. I also want to talk about methodological insights, for example, what it means to execute a longitudinal population-based survey, and also some insights about what study-focused ethnography, that is dedicated ethnographic attention to what's happening in a research site that is set up and principally designed for survey research, can add to our knowledge. And finally, I hope that it comes across that often in sociological research, the things we set out to study aren't always the things that matter most in the communities that we're working in, and they're not the things that matter most in terms of models either. And so I'll give some examples that I hope illustrate that and why flexibility in study design is so important, whether you're doing a relatively small student-based, whether you're a student doing a relatively small MA project, or whether you think you're going to be running a study for 10 years. So to give you a sense of where this talk is going, I'm going to start by introducing the Segola-Atanzi study and describing to you how it was designed, what it looks like. I then want to illustrate this concept that I'm calling population chatter with a field note that I wrote in 2010, which is one of the sort of scales falling from my eyes moments in terms of this data collection. And by population chatter, what I'm talking about is the way that ordinary people talk about population change and population dynamics. They do not speak in their everyday lives the same way that academic demographers do when thinking about fertility, mortality, migration, health and aging in their own families or in the communities around them, but they do speak about it quite a lot. And attention to population chatter, I think, can improve our insights that we're doing with demography, especially when it's used alongside our sort of standard and staple tools. And then I want to share two other vignettes, one that shows the importance of quantitative humility and some of the changes of the focus of the research as it unfolded over a decade. I'm going to show a couple of graphs that I think are pretty clear, that I hope that help you remember the primary and key findings about HIV for young adults in this community. And then finally, a vignette that illustrates how population chatter, I think, makes uncertainty, which is a fuzzy concept, visible to researchers. And when I go to the vignettes, I am going to read them, which is a little bit unusual, but I think the precise wording, how I came to it when I was actually discovering it. And then you will learn about some of the other collaborators in this project, specifically Gertrude Finiza, who contributed to the ethnography. So bear with me as I read them. I've tried to trim them to keep them short, and I've practiced. So I'm reading them. I'm not a theater person, but I've worked on my reading of these a little bit. So Segola-Atanzi means healthy futures in Chichewa, and it was set up to really it was guided by a single question, which is how do I have to move this right so you can see it? Let's see. There we go. There we go. How do young adults negotiate relationship, sex, and childbearing in the context of a severe AIDS epidemic, right? How do you get through young adulthood while trying to accomplish two different things? One is avoiding a deadly disease that is affecting a lot of people around you, that is prevalent and is transmissible. And second is forming the relationships that are essential for being an adult in this community, right? Where marriage and childbearing are quasi-universal and are expected parts of achieving the status of an adult. So this is what the study was designed singularly to focus on. And it's set in this community of Balaka, Malawi. And I get the question, I often get the question, how did you end up working in Malawi, or why in Balaka? And I'm going to try to answer that first by explaining that there is a sort of wonderful network of scholars working in Malawi. Many of us are there because of mentoring that we received from Susan Watkins, who first worked in Kenya studying fertility and then moved to Malawi, and is just a wonderful mentor and person who has brought a lot of different kinds of scholars together and encouraged us to work in this place. The other reason that I worked in Malawi is because I came to this question about HIV while working on my dissertation, which was focused on religion. And Malawi is a religiously heterogeneous country. It's also one where ethnicity, region, and religion are not especially overlapping the way that they are in Kenya and Zambia. And so Malawi was a place that I could study religion and study different religious communities in a single location, right? Rather than conflating religion and ethnicity, these were just not so highly correlated in Malawi, so it made it a great place for studying religion. And as I was studying religion and the religious responses to HIV, because I was a young adult, because I was pregnant with my daughter when I first started doing field work there, because I had young kids and I was thinking through family formation, it really stuck in my mind. Like, how do people have the families they want to have while avoiding HIV, right? The messaging from the Anglophone HIV prevention community is abstain, be faithful, use condoms. Well, you're not abstaining if you're getting married, if you're forming relationships. You're not using condoms if you want to have children. And being faithful, well, that's within your control, but another person's behavior isn't completely within one's own control. I was thinking obsessively about the trade-offs that people are making, specifically during the years of family formation. And Balaka has some of the highest levels of HIV, also earliest age at first marriage and earliest age at first childbearing, which made Balaka a really, really obvious place to situate the study. In addition to the fact that I had been working there for a couple of years, I had friends there, I had collaborators that I liked working with, and I had enough connections to make the infrastructure, to actually build the infrastructure we needed to execute this study. So when I say that like HIV and fertility are related to one another, I talk about this as a substantive intersection, and one that I think the international community overlooked too long. But these are just age-specific prevalence rates, prevalence estimates in this graph. And what you can see is that 2004, 2010, 2015 is going to look the same when we have the very, very good DHS data that was supposed to have been collected in 2020 and was probably collected in actually 2022 or 23. But HIV prevalence rises over the age groups, specifically where age-specific fertility is the highest. And when you go back to what I just explained about abstain, be faithful, use condoms, this is not incredibly shocking, right? The years of peak infections of HIV, when most people, specifically women, contract the virus, are the years that they are conceiving and having children, right? This is when because it's the same behaviors that produce children and also transmit HIV. So we set up the Segola Latanzi study in Balaka in a trading town, and the catchment area for sampling is about a 7-kilometer radius around the whole town. We created this with funding and a study design that was intended to cover about a 3-year observation period, following people at about 4-month intervals over 9 waves. And the reason we had these spaced so closely was because we thought this was the highest frequency people would tolerate, right? Keep speaking to us and coming back. And also in high quality longitudinal studies we had access to, we found that most of the things we were interested in happened during the inter-survey period. For example, Time one, we're interviewing a 16-year-old focused on school, has never had a boyfriend, is not planning on having children, is not worried about HIV. And at time two, this is a woman who is divorced from the baby's father, who has a child, is divorced from the father, and is either very worried or infected with HIV. Everything we're interested in terms of process happened in a very short period of time of 2 years. And so we really thought that a short inter-survey period was essential for understanding decisions and change during this period of the life course where things happen really, really quickly in people's lives. So we began by enrolling 1,500 women and 600 men, randomly sampled from the catchment area. They were all between the ages of 15 and 24 or 25, because going back to this graph, we really wanted to start following women before HIV prevalence became really high, as it did. We enrolled men the same age, and we also had a third way of enrolling people in the study, which is that women received tokens that they gave to their partners, to their male partners, to husbands and boyfriends and casual partners, though we didn't enroll many casual partners, who could enroll themselves in the study, and that would allow us to look at decision-making in a dyadic way, looking at couples making the decisions together. Now, I'll also speak a little bit about this intellectual intersection, thinking about how quantitative and estimation-focused science comes together with more ethnographic and theoretical approaches, which are sometimes, in my mind, artificially kept really far apart in terms of the communities that we engage with. And this idea of population chatter, again, how ordinary people think about and narrate and debate the demographic phenomena going on around them, I hope really punctures or permeates this boundary a little bit methodologically, but also constrains the topics that we're thinking about. Again, I'm taking an approach here that is very demographic in terms of the topics that I'm focusing on, not focusing on everything, but I am focusing on fertility, mortality, migration, health, and aging, with using both a wider range of tools than is maybe typical in academic demography. So the study, the way that it unfolds is TLT, founded in 2009, with this really, really intensive inter-survey period. Of course, our respondents age as the study goes on. We were very fortunate. Oh, and I also want to say that at this time in 2009, antiretroviral drugs were available. This is to keep people who are infected with HIV healthy, right? That they were available only for the very sick and for the well-connected. They were rare in Malawi. They were widely available in the United States and in other parts of the world, but they were scarce at the time that our study started. In 2015, we received additional funding to follow up the women. They would now be between the ages of 21 and 31. We continued to enroll male partners using these tokens, and this was in the context of a policy called Option B+. And I'll describe the policy in a little bit more detail, but the basics are that there are not enough antiretrovirals for everyone. We need to think about prioritizing distribution under some logic, and the way that we're going to distribute these is to prioritize first HIV positive pregnant women and keep them on antiretrovirals for life, regardless of their underlying health status, okay? So you don't have to be sick. You might get antiretrovirals if you're very sick. You may have access to them based on symptoms or through some other thing, but the option B+ is to treat all HIV positive pregnant women, specifically to reduce mother to child transmission and protect the next generation, okay? So this was the logic. It was pioneered in Malawi, and it was then exported to about 20 other African countries very quickly. And then finally, in 2019, we collected, we re-interviewed our original sample of respondents. We got about 80% of them. Because of funding constraints and questions about the way the data were being used, we stopped following men at this point in the study. It was 10 years later, and this is the context of universal test and treat, okay? So what universal test and treat means is that if you get an HIV positive diagnosis, you will be referred to and you will be given antiretroviral drugs on that same day, okay? You may not get a supply that you would like. You might want a 3-month supply, might be warranted, or that might be convenient. You might get 7 days if antiretrovirals are scarce in the community at this time. But the referral means that people who should get antiretrovirals are being treated at on the day of their diagnosis. So you can kind of imagine what a transformation this is from these life-saving drugs being really, really hard to get in 2009 to an instant referral, a short walk, and you will like have both instructions, counseling, and the medications on the same day. I just want to say really briefly, HIV isn't the only thing that changes in this community. Seth and I were talking a little bit earlier about this, and this is a community where the population is growing very rapidly, okay? Other things are changing here, not just treatment to HIV. There are political transformations, the community is growing, household sizes are actually getting smaller, so the households are more numerous. This is an agricultural setting, but fewer and fewer households can subsist only on land and are owning animals. This is all sort of a function of population increase in population density and a lot of pressure on land in this area. And some of the vignettes that I'll share give hints of that kind of thing. So this is a stylized way of thinking about this time in terms of HIV first in the early years, where even scientists on the international stage didn't really understand very clearly what was happening in terms of HIV, why it was so prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa. This is the time that we refer to as a mysterious plague, right? Mortality got really, really high, really, really fast. This is specific to Malawi, but it wasn't entirely clear what was going on. Susan Watkins actually used this phrase, confusion to clarity. Between 2000 and 2004, there wasn't a whole lot of intervention from the international community at this time, but in communities, it was clear that this disease was sexually transmitted, that it was a long latent period, and that thus it was hard to figure out where exactly it came from, and that it could be prevented, right? That if you changed your behavior, if you started using condoms, if you had fewer partners, you were more likely to avoid it, that you were more likely to live. So that became very clear in communities, even that those that were disconnected from Western NGOs between 2000 and 2004. Treatment started to be rolled out. This is single-dose nevirapine to reduce mother-to-child transmission, and then antiretrovirals between 2005, 2006. And again, depending on what you're reading, depending on where the data come from, the rollout is simultaneous, and depending on your perspective and your values, the rollout is simultaneously miraculous, right, and also extremely slow at the same time. But by the time we get to 2011, we have option B plus, and we have more and more. Option B plus really starts to increase the numbers of people on antiretrovirals at any given over this period of time. It shoots up really, really fast, and is becoming in Malawi, as it has been elsewhere in the world, a chronic and manageable condition. Okay? So this is these are the transformations you need to keep in mind. Now, here's where I'm going to really commit demography in this talk and say, like, think about these changes and then think about this cohort. Think about this cohort in the TLT study. They're born between 1984 and 1994, and I use their lifelines to help us think about age and time through these changes. What are their formative experiences? Well, they were just born when the first cases of HIV were registered. Okay, they never knew a world that wasn't affected by this disease, which I think is important for understanding their experience. They were very young when universal primary education became the policy in Malawi. You study education, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, you know, primary education in Malawi, universal primary education in Malawi is an aspiration. It is not the truth, right? Not every young child has been to school, but most have. They might not have gotten a great education. They might not have been in school for a very long time. They may or may not have learned to read, but they have been in a building that people call school and that we think of as part of an educational system. And so this is also important for thinking about the cohort's experience in terms of their attachment to institutions and sort of questions about the role of knowledge in understanding HIV. Do people know where it comes from? Do they know how you can prevent it? Yes, they have. They have all of this experience with the epidemic, plus they have information that they get in schools from life skills course, discussion with others. Knowledge levels are actually quite high. The people in our cohort were young and adolescents during these years of peak AIDS mortality. So, you know, when that curve went up steep to show AIDS-related mortality from 1990, when they were young people, when they were adolescents, they were going to between 4 and 9 funerals every month. Okay, these is those sort of level of death that was happening in these communities. And also, shortly after this, nevirapine and antiretrovirals become available. People see this, right? They have aunts and uncles, they have friends who are extremely sick, who are near death, and are getting treatment and get better, right? They put on weight, their skin gets better, they change, they can start working again. This happens when people who are very sick get antiretrovirals. They get better quickly, and it is a miracle. They call it like the Lazarus effect, right? They get better in, you know, Lazarus, right? So okay, well, some know Lazarus and some don't, but Lazarus was raised from the dead by Jesus in the Bible. So the Lazarus effect is getting better and really coming back from death or death's door in front of people's eyes. So this is the kind of thing that our cohort has seen. So I'm going to illustrate population chatter using these field notes that I wrote in 2010. And these were written in conjunction with Alice, who's an interviewer from the very beginning of the study, a very skilled interviewer and also a good friend of mine. So this is regarding respondent X, age 23, who was 7 months pregnant and HIV positive at her first interview. A few months later, she hasn't returned to be re-interviewed. Alice recruited and interviewed the respondent, so she knows the entire reproductive and marital history, including HIV status. The respondent and her husband both knew that they were HIV positive when the study started and they were taking antiretrovirals. Alice travels to the respondent's home to see if everything is okay. And at the compound, there are 2 houses with people living in them and 3 houses that have no people. Alice finds the respondent at home, but there is no baby. The baby has died and the husband has left. Before saying anything about the husband and baby, the respondent acknowledges the conspicuous emptiness of the compound. We were many people at our compound, but most of them died because of AIDS. One of them is my mother. She died of AIDS and her husband died of it too. We have 3 houses which have no people to live in them. My mom and my two aunts all died of AIDS. I don't know why we all die of the same disease. She goes on to explain the death of a child as the result of her HIV infection. If I have unprotected sex, I can become pregnant at any time. If I get pregnant, I will be pregnant, but that child will not survive. Believe me or not, HIV is dangerous. My best friend, she stays in the neighboring village. She started having a problem of ulcers. She and her husband were tested and found with the virus, but fortunately they have 2 children already. After this one died, my husband left me and that same day and went back to his home. The respondent tells Alice that her husband left her because she is not bearing children. He told her that he cannot stay without children. What he said specifically was, I don't think you're failing to have children because of the HIV. Don't you see all around us? There are many HIV women who go to clinics. You see them at the hospital receiving ARVs. They go to antenatal. They are still bearing children, and those children are surviving. This is not like the old days. HIV positive women today are having babies without any problems at all. HIV is not your problem. There's something else going on. This is the second baby you've lost. My family members are saying that you've been bewitched, and I can't help you with that. The respondent to her husband, I need to hear the truth from you. What are your plans? Are you divorcing me or what? You've already said you cannot afford to have 2 wives at the same time because you are poor. That much I understand, plus I would not stand for a co-wife. If you had told me you would like to marry another woman, who would to be your second wife, I would tell you to just go ahead with her. Now tell me what you want and please be straightforward. The husband, you were my first wife in my life, and the 2 children I lost with you were the only children I have had. Since this problem is not mine but yours, I will leave you here and look for another woman to marry. I don't mean the HIV problem. You have some other problem, which is why I'm deciding to leave you. Alice, who is HIV positive, disclosing this explicitly to me for the first time as we write up these notes, tells the respondent, Sister, I didn't tell you this when we met last time, but I have HIV too. And since I have had it, I've had 2 healthy babies and no miscarriages, and neither of my children has it. So I think your husband is right. There is something else going on with you, and you are going to need to figure out what that is. So a lot happens in this brief passage. And as I began writing up these field notes, I was literally looking at this as an attrition problem, right? What does it take to get women back in the study after they give birth? Do we need to do the follow-up interviews in their homes, or can they reasonably come back to the research center where we do this? So we bear witness to an infant's death, to a divorce. These were preceded by a previous death and HIV infections and diagnoses. And when we view the story from the perspective of academic demography, if we're presuming each element was time-stamped with perfect accuracy, I might draw a mini model with causal arrows from HIV status to what we call subfecundity, which would be trouble conceiving, and also to infant mortality, child survival, and then to carry that through to its effects on relationship quality or stability. Now, the scholarly literature supports such a model. This is a model of HIV, childbearing, and marriage, how they are all related to one another. And these hypothesized relationships, I think, would be borne out quantitatively by the suitable longitudinal sample survey data. But for the people living through it, births, deaths, marriages, and bouts of illness are not items on a checklist of vital events, but they are crucial stakes in a larger framework of meaning and their relationships to ultimate concerns. Here we stand at the material world of viruses, which all 3 actors in the exchange acknowledge and understand very, very well from a knowledge perspective. And also the supernatural world. There is an apparent curse on this poor young woman who has had to bury 2 children and many close relatives. It's important to note that this husband and wife understand the world with 2 very different models, and this is through these transformations of treatment about HIV, right? Longevity gets better, treatment is widely available, but things are still extremely confusing. Their interpretations are colored by disparate perceptions of demographic phenomena, specifically the broader landscape of fertility and mortality and the role of HIV in it. There's our models for how to act within a particular reality. Both are invoking demographic phenomena in their accounts, but they don't produce a singular, coherent, local perspective, but incompatible interpretations. In our respondents' model of the world, and I would put hers in the second panel here in panel B, HIV begets death. She resides in a compound that has been hollowed out by AIDS, and the absence of her female relatives is palpable. She attributes the death of 2 children to her own HIV status. And this is basically maybe a pessimistic, overdetermined version of the demographic model, save the fact that she has no trouble conceiving, right? So the subfecundity part isn't in her account. Because of her status, her children will not survive. She doesn't want to repeat the experience again. She plans to have a tubal ligation and either live alone or find a husband who, unlike her current husband, does not need children. The husband has lived through these same events, the diagnosis, the pregnancies, and the deaths, but his perception of the population phenomena that surround them is totally distinct. He is engaged with clinicians in HIV care, and he sees HIV positive women living normal lives and having healthy children. He draws no connection between HIV and his own losses. And it's precisely this lack of a clear causal arrow that begs for alternate explanations. A void that his family fills with a narrative about witchcraft, but he leaves a little more open-ended. If his words are to be believed, it's this mysterious other problem, not HIV, that drives him from the marriage. And regardless of its accuracy, his model determines the course of the relationship. He is the one who leaves. The mere suggestion of witchcraft might be startling to some readers, but it's worth pointing out that Alice, a trained HIV counselor who has been living with HIV for almost 2 decades and is intimately familiar with treatment regimens, family planning recommendations, the unique challenges of having children as an HIV positive woman, and her role as an interviewer to collect data and not be counseling respondents, likewise articulates a model that emphasizes this something else. When a woman who is receiving antiretrovirals loses 2 children, something else is not right. So here again, here it is not the HIV itself, but the uncertainty around it that has consequences for this marriage. And this brings us to back to this time of the option B plus, the option B plus policy, which really was putting HIV positive pregnant women at the forefront of treatment, right? So the man who is engaged with clinics is seeing this up close. He's seeing so many women have positive experiences. And I'll show you a little bit about the science about option B plus, how it increased. These slides are not mine. These are taken from like public health lectures trying to disseminate it. But this is really what we set out to study in terms of the rise of antiretrovirals, the policy that we thought was most important, and what brought us to construct a new research center in 2015 after we had turned over our original research center as part of the original research plan. We renovated and began collecting, following our respondents to understand more about the option B plus, the option B plus study. The TLT2 data collected in 2015 was collected at a time that antiretroviral access was again expanded. And alongside of this, in order to understand what people in the community were saying and what they understood about this policy, if anything, we collected what I call study-focused ethnography, which is ethnographers living in the community, writing field notes about their day-to-day conversations, specifically anything related to the topics that we're focused on or the study. There were lots of questions about why we were making bricks again, why we were building a new building, who we were hiring and why, how some people were lucky to get a job here and not others. And so these were the kinds of things that Gertrude Finiza captured in 2015, both staying in villages outside the catchment area, about 6-7 kilometers outside, and then in town, really close to the research center. And so I'll read to you one of the first field notes that Gertrude submitted to in April 2015 as we were getting ready to do their field work. And I want you to pay attention for both like the methodological sort of problems that you can imagine me panicking about as I read this field note for the first time. And then also what happens in terms of like the discussion that people are having around policies, et cetera. So Gertrude's approach is really just, it's hanging out and helping people. That's how, when they're not too busy, that's how she gets to know people. So while making my way, I saw 3 men in a tailoring shop sewing clothes. I decided to stop because they didn't have customers. And I asked them, how much is it to make a nice dress? One of the men said, it depends on the material you have. And then I said, you all look happy. That must mean life is good with you. And the men said, there's no need for us to be angry. If we were angry, customers would be afraid to come here. The I in this field note is always Gertrude, okay? So then I said, where do you prefer to stay, between village and town? They all agreed that town was better, and I asked why. In town, all the people look healthy, even if they're HIV positive, because of all the nice food they eat here. And people always look strong compared to the ones who stay in the village. Second man, in town, there's a lot of casual labor someone can do in order to find food and sew. You can do things like wash people's clothes, sell someone's things at the shop, ride a bicycle for hire, and people are also friendly here. The third man interjecting, especially those who drink beer. They're more friendly, and you will find that people buy beer for each other here. Village people don't do that. Then I asked, what happens here if someone wants to get married? One of the men said, well, you go to the chief and pay money. It's now 3,000 kwacha. If you quarrel with a friend about witchcraft, the chief asks you to pay money. And if you don't go to attend funerals, the chief asks you to pay 3 chickens. If you deliver a baby at home, the chief will make you pay. And if you have complications when giving birth at home and you want to go to the hospital, at the hospital, they will also ask you to pay money. Nowadays, if you deliver at the hospital, you receive some money. Like my wife gave birth in December and she received 5,000 kwacha and I was happy. At that time, I didn't have money to buy the things that my wife wanted, and she was able to buy them because of the money she received at the hospital. She bought maize, flour, soap, sugar. That program of giving money is good because not all people at the hospital have the necessities. The other man added, but I heard that the women who deliver through scissors don't get the money. That's cesarean section. And I don't know why that is. I asked, have you ever heard about TLT? One of the men said, yes, they were here in 2009, but now they've left. People were receiving money there, but I was not involved in TLT. The other man said, I was involved in TLT. My friend gave him a token because he didn't like the questions they were asking. And after asking many, many questions, we would receive 500 kwacha. They were questions like, how many times did you sleep with your wife this week? People were cheating. They were saying 10, 15 times when that is not true. We all laughed. I have been married 9 years now, and my wife has become rude. I think I will chase her away so I can marry you. I laughed and replied, how can you marry me when you don't even know me? The other men laughed and said, this is Balaka. You will get married here. When people come here, they find things they like and they want to stay. I asked, what kinds of things? And he said, it's easy to find a job, business works, and people have got money. So you have a taste of Gertrude's ability to sort of chat and listen to people. You also get a sense of this story. People talk about HIV a lot, not always in a tragic way, not always in the context of health. The prompt to which people are healthy and strong here, even those with HIV, it comes from, would you rather be in village or in town, right? It's not a particularly private or sensitive issue. We also have to acknowledge imperfections in our survey data. Now, bias in terms of especially responses to questions about sexual behavior is widely studied, specifically in the context of social desirability bias, right? Simple mischief in responses hasn't really been one of the categories that we dig into very deeply, but I hope that we do more of that. But also this idea of, or the reality of our enrollment processes and the difficulties of tracking respondents over time in a longitudinal study when in a place where vital registration is almost non-existent, people don't have ID cards. How do you verify identities? How do you keep the enrollments sort of sound and closely tied to your sample? How do you identify imposters, and what lengths do you go to sort of weed out imposters in a study? We think oftentimes about the difficulty of recruiting respondents and getting people to participate in our studies. We want to get the response rates up, but it's also important at the same time to understand that certain studies are set up with incentives to participate and occasional tricksters trying to work their way into a study rather than getting out of it. And so I write in the book about some of the ways that we've addressed this in our study and the things that we should be talking a lot more about in terms of data quality and those kinds, and data quality in particular. I also want to draw attention to how these men, and to me it's important to acknowledge that they're men, right? These are 3 men at a tailoring shop telling her in great detail how much money the women in their lives have received at the hospital with a variety of things related to childbirth. And again, it's a little bit surprising. I mean, we had started out, and the reason that we designed this ethnography component was really to understand what people were saying about option B+. Because we were studying HIV, we thought this was the most important thing to be studying. This is the most important transformation. But there were other transformations happening in this community. And this project called RBF4MNH, talk about an acronym that's a mouthful, is results-based financing for maternal and neonatal health. Now, this is a project that was initiated in in Balaka and in 2 other districts of Malawi in order to try to change these stubbornly high maternal and child mortality rates that had declined in many parts of the world, but not declined quickly enough in sub-Saharan Africa. And RBF4-MNH at the time had not been the subject of much scholarly literature. It had a huge investment, and it was imposed experimentally on the district, right? So the experiment was not allocated to some people and not others, but all women in Balaka district were subject to this. And it's a carrots and sticks policy that that gives an incentive to women to seek antenatal care, including getting payments, right? Such as the ones that the men describe at the tailoring shop. And secondly, sticks fines imposed on women who are non-compliant in medical terms, right? Who are delivering on the side of the road, not going to antenatal care, or delivering at home when the recommendations are all pointing towards trying to make sure that women are giving birth in hospitals and clinics. So RBF4-MNH was much more salient in our respondents' lives in an everyday conversation than option B+. We had no way to know even of its existence from the scholarly literature, although we knew there were a lot of different programs happening in Balaka. There's another thing called the MDFRA, which is the Malawi Defense of Marriage and Family Act, which was also implemented, which was also not really, maybe surprisingly, on demographers' radars. There have been like 2 or 3 scholarly articles written about this. But the idea here was, I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, Balaka has some of the earliest age at first marriage in all of Malawi, in all of the world, was to reduce child marriage. So the MDFRA imposes it imposes a minimum age at marriage, which is 18, to reduce child marriages. It also officially bans polygamy, and it bans other things such as pretending to be someone you're not in the process of getting married, right? So being a fraudulent partner through the marriage process, tricking someone into marrying you, and this was another. And there are and what this involved in the communities, and I really love showing some of these slides. I mean, this is the RBF4-MNH project as implemented in DEDSA, but you can see the ways that the fines are spelled out. For home delivery, for example, a woman needs to be paying 1 goat, the husband should pay 1 goat, and the people who assisted in the delivery should all pay 1 goat each after a thorough investigation as to the circumstances leading to the involvement of these assistants, right? So if you're on the side of the road and you help just to be a good citizen, you may not have to pay the fine. However, if you are a traditional birth attendant assisting a delivery, you are going to be fined for continuing to do that in the RBF4-MNH era. This ethnography was extremely important for showing us which policies were actually affecting people's lives. And the Malawi Defense of Marriage Act, this is a picture of a chief, and out of her big bag, she is pulling out the village register, okay, which is where she is recording the marriages. Now, marriages happen through a variety of different steps in the process in Malawi. It can be just moving in together. You can have a religious wedding. You can have a traditional wedding with marriage mediators called Chinkoswe. Most Malawians register announce their marriage to the chiefs in their village, so it is acknowledged. But the MDFRA gave all chiefs a special register for recording the marriages in order to help contribute to a better vital registration program and to try to measure marriages, but also a fee, right? A fee that had previously been kind of at the discretion of the chief for thinking about the what a person should pay in terms of their ability and their capacity in the village. Now it's 3,000 kwacha, right? To get married, you pay 3,000 kwacha. You go into the chief's book, and this is among the ways that marriage is changing in this community. Again, in a really, really under-documented way that has consequences for how the tailors are talking about these exchanges that are involved in the vital events that we're sort of measuring and thinking about. So I'm watching the clock and wanting to, I'm going to move to the final vignette to talk about the fact that HIV uncertainty, what people don't know about their HIV status, right? In the first vignette, we heard from a couple, they're both infected with HIV, they know their status, they are HIV positive. A lot of people don't know their HIV status, right? In a community where prevalence is between 10 and 15% among young adults, and it rises over the life course and over, especially as we were as our study unfolded. HIV prevalence is going up for all groups. It's going up less sharply for the younger cohorts compared to the women who were 20 to 25 when we first began the study. But HIV is not disappearing, right? Despite all of these transformations in treatment, and it creates really, really big dilemmas for people. So what I elaborate in the book is that HIV-related uncertainty is something we should think about more seriously. It's something we should try to measure, and it's something that we can link to other kinds of uncertainties in people's lives, that it has real consequences just as much as HIV, the virus itself, has consequences. The uncertainty that people live with has consequences. So I'll close with a third vignette. Is your appetite for vignettes okay? Are they a little long? Okay, I'm going to close with a third vignette, which is I shouldn't have favorites. You know, it's like, can I really have favorites? But this might be my favorite. So if you can follow Sex and the City, you can follow this vignette. But there are 5 characters. That's probably that's the old show. Like I need to update my references, but. In this vignette, a group of 5 women discuss their babies, the pregnancies, and the men in their lives, and this takes place at a hair salon in the center of town. Now, the cast of characters, it includes Gertrude, who you're already familiar with, Enid, the owner of New Styles Salon, and mother of a small child. Precious, who is 6 months pregnant by a man she is serious with, but not formally married to. Again, we're going to link to this marriage, to the marriage acts. An unnamed teenage girl with a newborn, and Tiamike, who is Gertrude's closest friend in Balaka. Tiamike has been in love with married man for more than a year, and she typically juggles 2 or 3 infrequent partners alongside that relationship. All right, so again here, the I in the story is Gertrude. I decided to pass by New Styles to say hi to Enid. I found her there with Precious and Tiamike. I joined them to chat, and they said, Gertrude, let's change your hairstyle now. You've stayed a month now without changing. And I said, no problem, girls, and they helped each other braid my hair again. Precious had to leave for an antenatal check at Mponda Clinic just up the road. I'll pass by after the clinic so we can all walk home together. A few minutes after Precious left, the man who was in a relationship with Tiamike came to bring her some lunch. He brought 2 packets of biscuits and 2 bottles of juice. He also gave her 2,000 kwacha and said she could use it over the weekend, but that he didn't have time to chat. He left, but Tiamike didn't escort him. I asked, why are you not escorting him? And she said, I'm afraid his wife will see me. She and I quarreled once, and I don't want that to happen again. So his wife knows about you. Yes, she knows. She doesn't like it, but she knows. How did she come to find out? That's a long story. I will tell you some other time. Not 30 minutes later, Precious came back from antenatal with a new RBF card in her hand. The clinic had no lines, so her visit didn't take long. I received this card at the hospital. The nurse said it's about maternal health. They want to encourage people to give birth at the hospital, not at home, because when you give birth at home, you can lose a lot of blood. So with this card, if we attend all the visits and collect the stamps, we'll receive some money. How much are you going to receive? 5,300. And Precious showed me the card. It was written 500 kwacha transport, delivery related 2,000, and 2,800 kwacha for something I couldn't read. The total 5,300. Also noted was the distance, 4 kilometers, age 22, and Precious's full name. Then Enid said, so you decided to receive the money after delivery? And Precious said, yes, I will if I have the chance, but I won't count on it because I hear that some people receive the card but still never receive any money. Then another girl came wanting to have her hair washed. She was carrying a small baby, and I asked if it was her child because the girl looked very young, and she said it was her child. I asked her how old she was. She said 16. And how old is the baby? 1 week old. Enid said to the girl, are you going to write your final exams? The girl said, yeah, I will. We start on June 17th. Enid laughed. So your baby came out on time, thinking my mother wants to write her exams. Good baby. And you can leave the child with your mother. What about the father? I asked. I'm not married. I just got pregnant while at school. I had a boyfriend and I thought we would get married, but when I told him I was pregnant, he didn't say anything. He doesn't take care of me or the child, but my mother does. Does he at least come to see the child? No, not even that. When I asked the girl where she delivered, she said, Mponda Clinic. I motioned to Precious and asked, did you receive any money after giving birth? She said no, and I asked why. I don't know why. I gave the card to my mother. Maybe she didn't go to receive the money. Then Precious asked Enid to wash her hair. Enid said, do you have any money to pay? And Precious said, yes, I do. Then I will wash your hair tomorrow because I want to close quickly today. Precious said, no, my husband's coming to see me, so can you please wash my hair now? Okay, fine, I'll wash you now. Is he going to spend the night here? Precious said yes, and she looked happy. She had already bought eggs and tomatoes. She wanted to prepare nice food for him. After washing her hair, we closed up the salon, and as we were ready to leave, the man who gave a child to Enid passed by. Precious started heckling him, shouting, look, that's the one who impregnated Enid, but he ignores the responsibility. He doesn't even take care of this child. He just keeps proposing women, and now that he is working and he has money, you girls always accept him, and he doesn't even tell you girls that he has a child. It doesn't even seem like she would be a great friend. The man was shuffling away quickly, as if he couldn't hear Precious, and we were all laughing, even Enid. I hate him, said Enid. We just had sex one time, and I fell pregnant. He ignored me, and I feel the pain because I'm taking care of the child myself, as if I had created her on my own. Why didn't you use a condom to prevent it? I asked. Enid replied, sometimes when you feel love, you don't think about the consequences, but you start regretting it before you reach home, and you start asking yourself, could I be pregnant? Precious laughed a lot and said, you see, girls, I am pregnant again because I thought we would get married, but he just comes and goes. He's always making promises, but he doesn't fulfill them. He told me to look for a house, but he hasn't yet paid for any house. We all laughed. Enid said, that's men. They all make someone cry. So a couple things that I want to point out in this exchange that I find so noteworthy and have spent a lot of time thinking about. The first is how much information is exchanged among this group of 5 women with varying degrees of familiarity with each other, right? Gertrude and Tiamike know each other well. They know a little bit about, they know each other quite well, but the teenager is meeting the 5 of them or the 4 of them for the first time. Precious and Enid are a little bit more loosely connected, yet they're talking about their complaints specifically with husbands and boyfriends in a quite intimate way. We also hear a lot about the RBF4MNH policy in this exchange and the confusion it is generating in this community. Okay, no doubt a well-intentioned project designed to reduce maternal and child mortality, of course, a good thing, right? Things that we want to accomplish. But what kinds of confusion are introduced in a community where payments are tied to events that are very dangerous in some people's lives? Some people are getting paid, others are not, and the conditions under which the criteria for payments and for fines are left very ambiguous to the population being affected, right? It is a topic of widespread concern and conversation in this community. And when you think about this teenage girl, the support that she's getting from her mother, the support she is not receiving from the father of the baby, it is absolutely unthinkable to me that they would not have that, you know, she says to her mother, maybe my mother forgot to receive the money. It is unthinkable that under these conditions, a person wouldn't have gone to get the money that was due to them, right? So whether it's cesarean births that are not receiving the money, whether it is aberrations in distribution at the discretion of workers and who are part of the program, or whether it is age thresholds, this teenager received zero, who probably could have used it very much, received zero compensation and was left with quite a bit of confusion, which really spreads in the community. We also hear Enid talk about, what in demographic terms we would talk about unprotected sex and unintended pregnancy in the way that she narrates her experience with her child's father, who also isn't providing who isn't really providing help, which is something that the Marriage and Family Act is intended to also help with, right? It also does supposedly protect women from losing property and upon divorce or when they are widowed, and also obligating fathers to support children and their mothers regardless of whether the marriage is formal or informal. But again, we still see these huge, these very, very clear articulations of vulnerability, where relationship vulnerability is really the centerpiece of the population chatter. We hear in public spaces Precious talking about antenatal care and preparing for a visit from her migrant husband, to whom he is not married. She is not necessarily married, right? It shows us a lot about the ambiguity of marriage in this community, where what constitutes a marriage is changing, right? Is it registering with the chief? Is it having a child together? Is it agreeing that you're married? Is it having a home together? Marriage is becoming harder and harder for people to achieve, yet it is extraordinarily important to all the people who are involved. So in closing, I will just say that the other sort of things that I hope that stick with you are the role of uncertainty in thinking about what this epidemic looks like for people. It is not the case that as HIV becomes a manageable and chronic condition, that uncertainty dissipates as HIV prevalence falls. It may indeed be the case that uncertainty actually grows and swells because there is so much more variability in the outcomes, because its visibility is reduced, and because its effects are less clear than it was in the past. It's also tied to so many other kinds of uncertainties that affect all of our lives, not just people who are living in poor countries under epidemic conditions, right? Reproductive uncertainty, livelihood uncertainty, and existential uncertainty are articulated very, very clearly in everyday conversation constantly in Malawi. But as I began to think about population chatter in this context, I've also become more interested in listening to it in our own and thinking about the ways that some of these same concepts and kinds of uncertainties are part of all societies, and how we can use the combination of ethnographic insights and demographic tools to try to understand it better in a rigorous framework. So with that, I'll thank you for your kind attention, especially through the long stories, and take your questions.